Do women plunder men in divorce? I'm going to say usually yes. I have known women who lost custody of their children in divorce, which is very painful for the woman, usually because she was going through some kind of addiction or something. And often the man can retaliate. The woman can retaliate too when she has custody. Let's just go over that whole thing of divorce a little bit. I see the side of men who feel plundered during a divorce. First of all, a lot of people can't even afford to get divorced. They stay married due to their religious beliefs or financial necessity. It's fucking expensive to get divorced. Not that many people can afford to live alone. I consider myself privileged to live alone. Most people need a roommate, and I know people who are staying married because they can't afford to get divorced. Neither of them earns enough money to sustain even renting an apartment, which in San Diego right now, a one bedroom is $2,300. In my apartment complex, a two bedroom is now $2,800, $2,750. Yeah, that's a lot of money. And so a lot of people stay married because they can't afford to get divorced. Now, when people get divorced, often there are conflicting things that come into the picture. When you're getting together, it's all love and happiness and let's combine and kumbaya. But when people get divorced, there are often a lot of hurt feelings. Because people don't readily get divorced, okay? People only get divorced because they have gone through a lot of emotional pain for a long, long time. They were emotionally neglected or abused for many years. And a lot of people won't even leave then. But that is why people leave. And by the time they leave, the person remaining behind might be surprised, which is unfortunate if you haven't communicated your unhappiness. Sometimes they're surprised. I don't think that men leave a woman because they like having affairs. They start having, they'll have affairs and stay with the woman. All right, so they'll leave the woman. I don't know why men leave the woman. I know that women have said, my ex left me for this other woman. He must have been unhappy with the ex. I don't know if they went to therapy or what they did. But by the time people get divorced, there's usually a lot of pain, and often with that comes retaliation. And then they start using the kids against each other, trying to turn the kids against each other, or not allowing the other person to have access to the kids, talking bad about the ex-partner to the kids, that kind of retaliation. And there can also be financial retaliation, like fuck you, I'm going to take you for everything you've got. But there could also be entitlement. They're all lack of boundaries. In an ideal divorce, people can work it out between themselves in an amicable way that's good for the children and good for each partner. But that is pretty rare, I think. That's what I did with my ex-husband, but I wasn't angry with him for cheating. But I was hurt. I left him because I was hurt for a long time. Now when it comes to divorce, okay, so we have these emotions. People feel hurt, they feel angry, or they feel entitled. And the courts just give in to that. They look at what each person earns, and the higher earner has to pay money to the lower earner. The higher earner could even be the woman. I know a case where a couple was divorced, and the woman had to make payments to the man, even though the man was earning a lot more money, because she, as the mother, was also responsible for paying half the children's medical and so on. So the reason that men usually pay is because the men are the main earners, Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's how the courts usually look at it. They look at how much do you earn, how much each person earns, and what the child needs, and then it depends on what each person earns. And usually the man earns more, and that's why the man ends up paying. Now, this is where the problem comes in. The problem comes in when there are children involved. Because when there are children involved, a woman has taken time out of the workforce, which reduces her ability to earn money. And that's where the alimony and child support comes in. And that ends up with men feeling plundered because who wants to give money to a woman that's no longer even fucking him, or that he doesn't even like, or that has turned her back to him? Like, I wouldn't want to do that. Let's think about what is the solution, because we're talking about children, and I'm a big believer that children need a mother at home, or a mother that's only working part-time. This is my philosophy, and I write about that in my book, What I Did for Sex. Because no one's gonna, I mean, leaving your little baby at childcare is like, that's like cruelty in my opinion. So I believe that nursing babies need a full-time mother at home, and then children need a part-time mother at home. Someone has to nourish the children, do the laundry, do the shopping, and have a nourishing heart space. It's important to nourish the home, and I'm taking a stand for that. Now, the problem that I saw when I had my children in the 90s is still a problem today, which boggles my mind, which is that a professional woman wanting to work part-time is pretty much fucking out of luck. Who hires part-time jobs? My daughter's going through that right now, too. I have a little 4-year-old grandson. She also wants to be with him. She has to work, so she's looking for part-time jobs. And it's really hard to find a really good paying part-time job still today in this age. So even back then, I was able to go back to I was a software quality assurance manager. I was able to go back to my job part-time after I had my daughter, breast pump in tow and everything. But after I was laid off from that job, when the company downsized, I was never able to find another professional job. I had a friend who was an engineer. She went back to her job part-time, and we had this whole group of women. Back then, men could still support a family, and we lived in Phoenix at the time. There was a whole group of women who wanted to do what's called sequencing. We stop our careers to be with our children, and when they're older, we go back to work. However, being home with children all day is hard. But even if women do go back to work, that does help them stay up with the income, and those women are able to divorce and do not have to plunder their husbands. But for those women, there were many women when my kids were little growing up. I lived in the suburbs, in an area where few of the women kept their careers. Most of the women stopped working because they had married men who could afford to provide, and a lot of women do like staying home with the kids. What happened was that what I saw was they stayed home with the kids, and then the kids entered kindergarten and they were still home with the kids. And I didn't want to work full time because I didn't want my kids to be in daycare after school till 6, and then who was going to make dinner and take them to soccer and piano lessons and all of that. So women like me, we ended up not going back to work. I chose to go back to work part-time. I started my real estate blog during the housing bubble, and I became a realtor. I always wanted to still keep doing something. I got my MBA when my kids were little, but a lot of women did nothing, and then eventually their kids were in high school and they still had done nothing. And so I had a friend whose husband was a successful fund manager in Boston, and at some point when he lost his job, she had to work. And the dilemma was this: she's like, I haven't worked in 20 years. The most I could make is $10 an hour. It's not worth it. Or even if it's $20 an hour, because they were like he was like a very high earner level as this fund manager. And so I looked at women like that, or the moms that I knew whose kids were in high school, they hadn't worked, and now they have no job skills. Who's going to hire someone who hasn't worked in 20 or 25 years? I mean, at least me with my blogging, I stayed up with the Excel and with the word perfect or Word and, the internet and social media and marketing and all of that. And they weren't doing that. So now I have some friends my age who are going through a divorce, and they were at one time professional women who haven't worked in 20 years, and now they're divorcing, and their husbands make a lot of money, and they feel like, he neglected me all these years. And that's the reason that women usually leave men, is because they were abusive or neglectful for years. They didn't want to go to therapy, and they didn't want to change it. So let's not pick a side like all men are bad or all women are money grubbing bitches, because just from what I've seen, women usually leave because they were emotionally neglected or abused. And then they're like, okay, well, how am I going to support myself? This guy, I haven't worked in 20 years. So what's the answer? They can't make enough money to support themselves in today's expensive rental market. And so, I guess maybe there's some entitlement to take part of the man's money. I really think a fair thing is to split all the assets, but not all people can afford to split assets, or maybe there are no assets. So then the women look to the men to give them money. Now, if we no longer look to men to give us money in divorce, that means that women should never stop working. They should keep working. And then who's going to take care of the kids? And then we have more people in the labor market, which is going to push down wages for men. And it's going to make men even more disposable to women, because if you can't even be there for me when I'm helpless nursing a baby and I need a provider, why do I even need you? And if I can't keep a home, why do you even need me? Like, this separation of roles, I think, is actually makes us need each other and makes us, I like that in my marriage. We had a very traditional marriage. I like that because I felt like I needed him, and he felt like he needed me. He thought I was a good mother. I took good care of the home. I did his errands for him, like I picked up his dry cleaning or did his ironing and made his meals and cleaned the house and took good care of his children and all of that. And so he appreciated that, and I liked that he did stuff around the house, and he knew about cars, and he was a good father and a good provider, and I liked those separate roles. But, if I had been working too full-time, then I don't know. So what I did personally, I started, when I got divorced, I'm like, okay, I'll make my own way in the free world. I'm not some helpless woman that's going to take money from a man, because I didn't need the manosphere. I have a brother who hates women. And a lot of these manosphere guys are very combative towards women. Women are money grubbers. They have a high body count. They plunder us for our money. There's a lot of distrust there, and I know that distrust because I have a brother who comes from that, and I love my brother. And so I have a lot of compassion for those men, as long as they're not like too angry. And let's see, what was I going to say? I don't, but his anger towards women is why he's still single. Those men that are so bitter around women, what do women want from me? And they're out to plunder me, and they don't love me. Women can never love me. It's that because in my brother's case, he feels like his mom didn't love him. I think behind every man who is walled off to a woman is a man who didn't ever feel a woman could love him, And even though my mom does love him, anyway. So I know that mindset, and I have compassion for men on that, but I don't know what the answer is, because we also need good parenting. We need good parenting. So what do you guys think is the solution? Oh, so in my case, I went back to work. I'm like, I'm not going to plunder my husband the way that, I'm not going to be one of these money grubbing bitches. And also, I remember years ago, my mom had a friend who was disabled. She had trouble walking, and she refused to put a disabled placard on her vehicle because she said, I'm not going to let myself be labeled as disabled. I am abled. And I would never forgot that. I was so impressed with that. And that kept running through my mind. Like, I'm never going to be this helpless woman who needs to get money from a man she's not fucking. And I also remember when I was younger, I had a neighbor who started a whole career as an art consultant after her kids were in college, and she hadn't worked at all. She just started this whole business. And I kept having in my mind all this time for 20 years that I wanted to be like her and one day start my own business. And I'd always been a person who wanted to work for someone. I was not an entrepreneur. I just kind of turned into that. So when I left my husband, I was working at the time on a consultant basis, making $35 an hour. And I don't like to work full time. I don't believe in that. So you might say I'm entitled. I'll take it. Like, but I was working 30 hours a week, and it wasn't enough to even pay my bills. So I wrote that book, The Fuck List, and then I quit my job anyway. I thought I would make money off the book, and I didn't. And then I became a stripper, and then I became an escort. Then I started my Just for Fans, and now I can provide for myself really well doing that. So I didn't take money from my ex-husband. We just went to court and solved everything amicably. We split what we had in half, and we went our separate ways. And neither one of us retaliated against the other financially or with our kids. Even though I will say it took me 8 years to get over feeling victimized. I felt wronged for all the ways he had ignored me all those years, but I allowed it, and I also know that he felt maybe victimized because he didn't like being the provider. And that's another thing. Not all men want to provide. Some do and some don't. Anyway, I digress. I think that my case is unique. I know there are people who can't afford to get divorced because they can't afford to have two homes. And so the answer is to plunder the man because the women's earning capacity isn't there. Now that is because of children. In the case of a couple who has no children, they're both going to keep their careers. So that is never an issue. They can just split and go their separate ways. The plundering, and I'm going to call it plundering because it feels like plundering to the man. The plundering happens when there are children involved. And so I don't know what the answer is. What do you think is the solution to that? And what is it that makes us, and do you see, what is your view on people having roles in a relationship, like one person being the provider and one person more taking care of the house? Or do you think that everything should be equally shared? And what is the impact on the couple's sex life? Because I think that the main reason to be in a relationship, besides companionship, is to have sex. To have really good physical contact, and connection, which is so healing to the soul. And what happens to the couple's sex life when they have children and they're working full time? They don't really usually have a lot of time for sex. So those are all, there are no easy answers. But just as in the case with the thing with the C word that's going on where we're wearing these things, instead of us just pitting ourselves against each other, why don't we just see that we're all one species? Men have weaknesses, women have weaknesses, but the system is actually kind of flawed. Ideally, there is some kind of support for children. The whole thing of the plundering has to do because there are children involved. That's why women leave the workforce. That's why women earn less than men. If they do, it's because of children. And I am a really big believer that children need more nurturing than they're getting, not less. Children, everybody who's going around plundering or feeling depressed or anxious, it's because of their childhood. They didn't feel loved, or they were spoiled, or they saw abuse, or they were neglected. So we need more support for children, we need more support for mental health, and we need more support for people who've given up, you know, in their lives, financially or emotionally. And that's what I think. Yeah. Thank you for watching my video.